Welcome back to the deep dive. I thought we'd seen it all in 2016, but this election, wow. Donald Trump is back in the White House, and it wasn't even close. He won both the Electoral College A&D, the popular vote, against Kamala Harris. So we're going deep into a BBC News article. They've been reporting from some key states, trying to unpack what happened.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating puzzle.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't just a repeat of Trump's previous victory. This time, he flipped those traditionally Democratic blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which really solidified his win.
Exactly. And one of the biggest surprises, at least to a lot of the pundits, was the shift in the Latino vote. The BBC article found a 14 percentage point swing towards Trump compared to 2020, particularly in Pennsylvania, where he captured 42% of that vote. In 2020, it was only 27%. So what happened?
Well, it's tempting to just say the economy, right? And yes, inflation definitely played a role. But if we look closer at the article's interviews, we see it's not just that people were struggling. It's how Trump tapped into those struggles. Remember that voter in Pennsylvania who talked about egg prices skyrocketing? That's the kind of relatable everyday impact that really hit home.
It's interesting because even back in 2016, there was economic anxiety. But Trump's message seemed to resonate differently this time around. What do you make of that?
I think you're onto something there. Back then, it was more about a general feeling of things being off, of jobs going overseas. This time, it was the immediate pain of grocery bills, car loans, things people felt every single day. The article quotes a delivery driver in Michigan, a former Ford worker, who voted for Trump specifically because interest rates on car loans were out of control. That's a direct link between policy and personal pain. That's hard to ignore.
So it was less about abstract economic ideas and more about that gut punch to the wallet.
Exactly. And the article suggests the Republicans were very savvy in framing the Democrats' policies, even those aimed at long-term benefits, as causing this immediate pain. For example, while the Democrats talked about investing in electric vehicles, the Republicans countered that those very investments would lead to job losses in the auto industry. And that resonated particularly with blue-collar workers who were already feeling vulnerable.
That's a really interesting point. So it wasn't just that the Democrats weren't addressing economic anxiety, but that their solutions were actually being framed as part of the problem.
Right. And that goes back to what we were saying about the messaging. It wasn't just about acknowledging the struggles. It was about offering a solution that felt immediate and tangible, even if it meant oversimplifying the complex issues at play.
And did the article touch on anything besides economics? Was there anything else motivating Latino voters to switch sides?
Absolutely. While economic anxiety was widespread, the article also highlighted how Trump's hardline stance on immigration resonated with some Latino voters, particularly those who feel strongly about legal immigration. This aligns with some research that shows the diversity of opinion within the Latino community on issues like border security. It's not a monolithic group, and their concerns and priorities reflect that.
So it sounds like reducing this shift to just one issue is missing the full picture. You've got economic anxieties, yes, but also complex views on immigration and probably a whole lot more we need to unpack.
Precisely. And speaking of need to unpack more, the article also mentions that Trump made gains among other demographics, too. It wasn't just the Latino vote that shifted.
Really? Who else saw change?
While young voters still largely favored Harris, the gap narrowed considerably compared to 2020. And even more surprisingly, Trump more than doubled his support among black voters in Wisconsin. While Harris still held an edge with these groups, the margins were much tighter than before, which raises some interesting questions.
You're right. That is fascinating. So this wasn't just one group swinging the election, but multiple groups moving in Trump's direction. Do we know anything about what motivated those shifts?
That's what we're going to explore next. The BBC article dives into some specific examples and regional trends that help shed light on what happened, particularly in those key wow counties in Wisconsin and the heart of the auto industry in Michigan.
Okay, so we're moving beyond the big picture numbers and into the stories of individual voters and communities. I'm ready to dive deeper into that.
Let's start with Wisconsin specifically, those wow counties the article mentions. Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington, they're traditionally Republican. And this time, Harris's campaign wasn't able to flip them or make any significant inroads.
So she missed out on some potential gains there. But it wasn't just the suburbs, right? The article also mentioned that Harris lost ground in rural areas of Wisconsin, too.
Exactly. And this really highlights that rural-urban divide that we've been seeing play out in American politics for a while now. The article quotes a voter from rural Wisconsin. He said he felt like the Democrats were only interested in the cities. and didn't understand the needs of people living in rural communities.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of voters, regardless of their background, were feeling this sense of being forgotten or misunderstood by the Democrats.
I think that's a key takeaway here. And it wasn't just Wisconsin. The article paints a similar picture in Pennsylvania, particularly in what they call the Latino belt, an area that's been trending Republican in recent elections. They spoke to a state constable named Samuel Negron, who simply said, "We like the way things were 4 years ago."
Wow, that's pretty straightforward. He's not mincing words there. It sounds like there's a nostalgia factor at play, a longing for a time when things felt more stable, at least economically.
Yeah, absolutely. For many voters, that sense of stability, even if it was more perception than reality, was tied to Trump's previous administration. And it seems like the Republicans were able to successfully tap into that nostalgia, contrasting it with the economic uncertainties of the present.
It's interesting how elections are not just about the future, but also about how we remember the past. Those memories and how they're framed by political campaigns can have a huge impact on how people vote.
You're absolutely right. And that's why understanding the narratives that shape those memories is so crucial. It's not just about the facts and figures. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about the past and how those stories influence our choices in the present.
Okay, so we've got economic anxieties, rural discontent, a bit of nostalgia for a perceived better time. Anything else driving this shift in voter behavior? The article did mention social and family values, right?
Yes, and this is particularly important when we're looking at the Latino vote. While economic concerns were widespread, the article also highlighted how some Latino voters felt more aligned with the Republican Party on issues like traditional family values and religious beliefs.
This reminds me of something you said earlier about how it's important to avoid generalizations about any demographic group, especially one as diverse as the Latino community.
Exactly. It's a mistake to assume that any group votes as a bloc or is motivated by a single issue. Within the Latino community, you have a wide range of viewpoints on social and cultural issues, just like you do in any other community. And those viewpoints are often influenced by factors like country origin, generation, and personal experiences.
So it's not just about being Latino, it's about the individual's unique background and how those experiences shape their political beliefs.
Precisely. And that's why understanding this shift requires us to go beyond broad generalizations and really delve into the nuances of individual stories and perspectives.
Speaking of individual stories, the article really brought those to life, especially that Michigan voter, Naheem Odin, the delivery driver and former Ford worker who voted for Trump specifically because of the skyrocketing interest rates he encountered when trying to buy a car.
Naheem's story is a perfect illustration of how personal economic realities can directly influence voting decisions. It wasn't about abstract economic theories or campaign promises for him. It was about the tangible impact on his ability to buy a car, something that most people can relate to.
And he wasn't alone. The article mentioned other voters struggling with rising prices, whether it was at the grocery store, the gas pump, or when trying to buy a home.
It seems like those everyday economic struggles really cut through the noise of the campaign rhetoric
Yeah.
and resonated with voters on a visceral level. It wasn't just about statistics and economic indicators. It was about the lived experience of trying to make ends meet in a time of increasing financial pressure.
And it seems like the Republicans were able to effectively connect those personal struggles to the policies of the Democrats, whether it was fair or not.
Right. They created a narrative that blamed the Democrats for those struggles,
Yeah.
even if the economic reality was more complex than that. And that narrative, combined with a sense of nostalgia for a perceived better time, proved to be quite powerful.
Okay, so we've talked about the wow counties, rural discontent, the complexities of the Latino vote, and the power of personal stories like Naheem's. But the article also mentioned young voters, Black voters. Were there any insights there, or are those groups too diverse to draw any conclusions from?
It's true that both groups are incredibly diverse, and it's important to avoid oversimplification. But the article does offer some interesting glimpses into what might be happening.
Okay, I'm all ears. What did they find?
When it comes to young voters, it seems like those economic concerns we've been discussing were a factor there too. They're facing a tough job market, high student loan debt, and the rising cost of living. It's not surprising that some of them might be looking for change, even if they don't necessarily agree with all of Trump's policies.
So even among young people who traditionally lean more liberal, those bread and butter issues were hitting home.
Exactly. Yeah. The article quotes one young voter. She said she was tired of struggling to pay her rent and felt like neither party was really listening to her concerns. It seems like there's a sense of disillusionment, a feeling that the system isn't working for them.
Yeah, that's a sentiment we've heard echoed in other parts of the electorate, too. It's like this underlying frustration with the status quo, regardless of age or background.
Right. And that frustration can be fertile ground for a candidate like Trump, who's very good at tapping into those feelings of anger and resentment. He's a master at positioning himself as the outsider, the one who's going to shake things up
Yeah.
and fight for the forgotten man.
And in a way, he did shake things up, didn't he? He flipped those blue wall states, made gains with Latino voters, even saw some movement among young and black voters. It's a pretty impressive feat.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
It speaks to a certain political savvy, an ability to read the mood of the electorate and tailor his message accordingly.
Hmm.
He identified those key issues: economic anxiety, cultural anxieties, a sense of being left behind, and he hammered away at them relentlessly.
It's like he found the pressure points of the American psyche and pushed them with laser-like precision.
That's a great way to put it. And it highlights the challenge for the Democrats going forward. They need to find a way to connect with those voters on an emotional level, to offer solutions that feel tangible and immediate, and to address those deeper anxieties that are driving so much of our political discourse.
So it's not enough to just have good policies. You need to be able to sell those policies in a way that resonates with voters' deepest fears and aspirations.
Exactly. It's about understanding the psychology of the electorate, about tapping into those primal emotions that drive so much of our decision-making. It's about storytelling, about crafting a narrative that speaks to the heart as well as the head.
And it seems like Trump is a master storyteller, at least when it comes to politics.
He certainly knows how to create a compelling narrative, whether you agree with him or not.
Mhm.
There's no denying his ability to connect with a certain segment of the electorate on a visceral level.
So where do we go from here? What lessons can we take away from this election?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that we're living in a time of profound economic and cultural anxiety.
Hmm.
And those anxieties are shaping our politics in ways that we're only beginning to understand.
Yeah, it's like we're in this period of transition,
Yeah.
of uncertainty, and people are looking for answers, for someone to tell them that everything's going to be okay.
Right. And in the absence of clear answers, people are gravitating towards those who offer simple solutions, even if those solutions are unrealistic or even harmful in the long run.
It's a dangerous dynamic, isn't it? This tendency to oversimplify complex issues
Yeah.
and to look for easy answers when there really aren't any.
It is dangerous,
Hmm.
and it's something that we all need to be aware of. We need to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives that we're being fed,
Mm.
and to demand more from our leaders.
So it's not just about who we vote for, but about how we engage in the political process.
Yeah.
About holding our leaders accountable and demanding solutions that address the root causes of these anxieties, not just the symptoms.
Absolutely. We need to move beyond the sound bites and the slogans and start having real conversations about the challenges facing our country. We need to listen to each other, to understand where we're coming from,
Hmm.
and to find common ground.
It's a tall order, but it's essential if we want to create a more just and equitable society, one
Well-
where everyone feels like they have a stake in the future.
Well said. And this deep dive, while focused on a specific election, really speaks to those larger questions about who we are as a nation and where we're headed. It's a reminder that elections are not just about choosing a president, but about defining our values and shaping our destiny.
That's a powerful thought to leave our listeners with. This election may be over, but the conversation is far from finished.
And as we move forward, let's remember that the most important deep dive is the one we take into ourselves, into our own beliefs and biases, and into our shared responsibility for the future of our nation.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more insights and analysis. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.